Right now, the global economy is facing a threat that feels eerily familiar. It echoes a really painful decade in our economic past. So today, we're going to dig into this rising risk of what's called stagflation and ask the big question: is history actually repeating itself? Are we headed for a repeat of the 1970s? I mean, you've probably felt this yourself, right? Your grocery bill is higher, gas is more expensive, but at the same time, you turn on the news and all you hear is slowing growth and recession fears. It feels contradictory, doesn't it? How can prices be soaring if the economy is supposed to be hitting the brakes? And yeah, this isn't just a local problem, it's a global one. Just take a look at the sharp upward curve on this chart, especially from 2021 onward. From the biggest advanced economies to emerging markets, prices are rising at a rate we just haven't seen in decades. Well, this really uncomfortable mix of rising prices and a stagnant economy isn't new. Economists have a name for it: stagflation. And let me tell you, it's a word that strikes some serious fear into the hearts of policymakers, and for a very good reason. So, what is it exactly? Well, think of stagflation as this toxic economic cocktail. You've got high inflation, which just erodes your purchasing power. You combine that with slow or sluggish economic growth. And then the final ingredient is often rising unemployment. It is literally the worst of both worlds, and it is notoriously difficult to fix. You know, to really understand the risks we're facing today, we have to look back. We have to look at the last time the world was truly gripped by this thing. So let's take a quick trip back to the 1970s. The 1970s was a decade of, well, economic turmoil. It kicked off with a massive oil shock in '73, which sent inflation soaring to almost 17% just a year later. A deep global recession followed. Then, just when you thought things might be settling down, bam, a second oil shock hits in '79. The only way out was a series of incredibly painful interest rate hikes that ended up causing another deep recession in the early '80s. And this quote from the World Bank really highlights just how painful that solution was. Escaping the '70s stagflation was no walk in the park. The cure, those steep increases in interest rates, was almost as bad as the disease. It caused a global recession and triggered a whole string of financial crises, especially in developing countries. So that brings us back to the crucial question: are we just watching a rerun of a really bad movie? Let's explore some of the, frankly, unsettling parallels between that decade and today. The first and maybe most obvious echo is where the problem started: massive disruptions to global supply. This slide gives you a really powerful visual comparison. On the left, you've got that inflation spike of the 1970s, driven by oil. On the right, you see today's price increases in food and energy. Now, the specific reasons are different: a pandemic and a war instead of an oil embargo. But the effect on prices is strikingly similar. All right, the second parallel is all about what central banks were doing before the crisis hit. In both periods, you see, monetary policy was extremely loose, which just made it really, really easy to borrow money. And this one number pretty much says it all: negative 0.5%. That was the average real interest rate, which is just the interest rate minus inflation, leading up to both periods. In simple terms, money was essentially free to borrow. And that, of course, fueled a ton of spending and helped lay the groundwork for inflation to really take off. And the final similarity? Well, this one's deeply worrying. This chart shows that the projected slowdown in global growth today is actually steeper than what the world experienced after that 1975 recession. We're decelerating faster. So you put it together: the supply shocks, the easy money, and now a sharp slowdown. The parallels are pretty clear. But, and this is a big but, history doesn't always repeat itself perfectly. Despite all those scary parallels, there are some crucial differences between now and the 1970s that give us real reason to believe we can avoid the same fate. We're just in a different world today, and for a few key reasons. Our central banks are stronger and much more credible. What people expect to happen with prices is more stable. Our economies are more flexible, and, for now at least, the commodity price shocks haven't been quite as extreme as they were back then. One of the biggest differences is how central banks operate. I mean, look at this. Today, central banks in most major economies have clear, public mandates to keep prices stable. They often use specific inflation targets. Back in the '70s, this just wasn't the norm. It's a whole different framework now. And that credibility has a massive real-world effect.
Because people and businesses generally believe central banks will get inflation under control, they don't rush to demand huge wage increases or hike prices ahead of time. And this helps prevent that dreaded wage price spiral that made the 1970s inflation so persistent and so hard to beat.
Our economies themselves are also just built differently. The 1970s, as you can see on the left, had all these rigidities, widespread wage and price controls, much higher union membership. Today, our markets are far more flexible. So what does that mean? It means businesses can adapt to rising costs more nimbly, which can cushion the blow for everyone and help prevent widespread layoffs. So, after weighing the similarities and the differences, what does this all mean for the path forward? What are the key lessons we can take from this whole historical comparison? Well, here's how it all stacks up. The top 3 rows show those troubling similarities. We've got the severe supply shocks, the history of easy money, and a weakening growth outlook. But the bottom 2 rows, that's our potential saving grace. Much stronger central bank credibility and far greater economic flexibility. So if there is one single takeaway from the entire stagflation saga of the 1970s, it is this. Policymakers have to act early and with conviction. The absolute biggest mistake is to let inflation expectations get unanchored. Because once people start believing high inflation is permanent, the fight to get it back down becomes exponentially harder and way more painful. And that leaves us with the trillion-dollar question for the global economy today. We know what needs to be done, tame inflation, but doing so means slowing the economy. So can central banks and governments achieve that delicate balance, that so-called soft landing? Or will the medicine required to cure inflation end up causing a deep and painful global recession, just like it did in 1982? That is the tightrope they are walking right now.